All right, welcome everyone to the Infinite Expansion podcast brought to you by the Last American Vagabond. I'm going to be your host, Tim, and boy, do we got another good show for you today. Seems to be the granddaddy of all topics almost, as far as we've been exploring it the last few months here. We're going to be talking about Yuga Cycles and how the Yuga Cycles might tie into growing Earth theory. And if you don't know what those are, don't be worried. We're going to talk about those here. And I wanted to preface two things before we really dive in here. First one, and I think this is so important to preface this before we start, that this is a working theory. It is entertaining an idea. Now, I think there might be a lot behind this idea, but we're entertaining an idea. So to take everything we say here as 100% fact, you're totally missing the boat. We're in the early stages of really exploring this idea more. It's not that it's a new concept, but there's a lot here. And so please just have an open mind when listening to this. Look into this yourself, come to your own conclusions, expand upon this. But don't just go think, oh, these guys, they're not spitting 100% true facts based on 100% science, and they're all shills, because there is a lot here, and there's so much more that we as a community need to explore. Second thing that I wanted to do was, really, if you haven't watched the previous podcast on growing Earth, really that's kind of a prerequisite to understand, if you're going to really understand how this ties into Yuga Cycles. And I'm going to link that up in the show notes. I'll probably link it up right in the video if you look on the screen right now. So please check that one out probably first before you really dive into this one. The basic premise of that one is that the Earth is growing in mass, and we talk a little bit about what the data is to suggest this, how it might be growing, and kind of some implications. And so today, to talk with me about Yuga Cycles, I have once again the great Jay the Explorer with us.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, to offer some of his wisdom. This is a topic that me and him have been really going back and forth and researching for, I don't know, it feels like a month or two now. Been really diving into it deep here. So before we get into the Yuga Cycles, I wanted to first talk about how the Earth is growing. And we had talked about this in the previous podcast a little bit, but I wanted to retouch on this because it's pretty important concept to then tying into Yuga Cycles. So first, I'm going to toss this to you, Jay. Can you kind of explain a little deeper how the Earth exactly is growing? Like, what is the process?
Okay, we'll just do a little recap. Well, the Earth is growing via a process of pair production, which we don't have to go too much into it, but essentially it's a combination of energetic photons striking inward-facing fields. You can call that protomatter, ether, prana, whatever, in a magnetic field. So you have those three components. You have energetic photons striking inward-facing fields, or ether, in a magnetic field. And that results in hydrogen production, results in eventually helium, water, all the matter we see around us. So that's kind of the engine for matter production. And this is going on not just in the Earth, that is going on in Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, the Sun, other stars. It's going on all over the universe. We're using this as our working hypothesis. I wouldn't even call all this a theory yet. It's a hypothesis. We're just running through ideas and see how they connect together. So for more detail, of course, you can refer to our previous episode on growing Earth. For more detail than that, check out Neil Adams and his animations that show the growing Earth, that show growing Mars, that show growing Europa, Ganymede, in really nice animations that demonstrate this. So just some of the implications of that are just that in itself has some pretty interesting implications. One of them is that water is actually being generated within the earth. That I've heard that called primary water. There's actually a website, primarywater.org, that goes into this in a lot more detail. So rather than just the earth having a fixed amount of water, it's actually generating more water all the time. The same with petroleum. Another implication is that if the earth is generating mass out of seemingly nothing, it's not nothing, it's ether, it's prana, it's around us all the time. But that implies that we can generate energy out of that nothing. And that you may have heard this called 0 point energy. And it's kind of a holy grail for cutting edge physicists since I was a little kid. And if you want to look more into that, Marco Rodin is all on top of this. His YouTube channel is Marco Rodin. We'll put links to this. Some of the other guys that are all over this are Jamie Buterf. His channel is Jamie Buterf. Randy Powell. His channel is Agartha's 888. Jason Verbelli, the Real Verbs 2. So these guys, they go into a lot of the theory behind this. This is super interesting stuff, and we're going to have to do a podcast just about Rodin coils one of these days. Soon as I get more up to speed on that. But there's some really interesting vortex-based math that describes the whole thing, and it's actually, the more I look, the more it just seems really, really simple. And kind of this whole thing we're talking about today, it's once you get it, it's really simple. It's really simple, just how a lot of different things hook together. So that's just kind of a brief recap of growing Earth, how it grows, what's involved, and one point I'll leave at the end of that is what happens when the solar system moves into an area of more dense magnetic field, which would consequent more dense ether or protomatter. Think about that. You would think the pair production would speed up, but we'll leave that for a second and move on to Yuga cycles, unless you have something more to add to there.
Yeah, I was just saying one of the important things to remember in this, because pair production, that is a known thing. I mean, you can look at it on Wikipedia. The problem is that a lot of people, because what usually happens is that the high energy photon strikes the ether, or this protomatter, I always just call it ether, and it splits them into what I think a positron and an electron, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then what happens is they usually come right back together.
Right.
And people say annihilate each other, but really they're just coming back together, and there's no new matter formed from that. But when this is in an electromagnetic field, then the electromagnetic field allows them to separate and then become matter. And it just so happens that they become hydrogen, the first element on the periodic table. So it would seem to align pretty well with that. And I also wanted to add that it seems that this ether, this magnet, is sucked in through like a magnetic field that the Earth has, which seems speculatively, but I think there's quite a bit of science behind this, but it's still a kind of a new science in a way, through this double torus type field, which brings it into the center of the Earth in like a vortexual type of pattern, from what I understand. And brings it into the center, and I think that the high energy photons is in the plasma of the Earth, and then the ether gets struck in there, and then that's why it comes from the center of the Earth, and then expands outward. So I thought those were a few points that I wanted to add.
Yep.
And this could explain as well. So we know that the north and South Pole, like Antarctica and North Pole, are kind of off limits. There's like weird. There's in Antarctica. There's treaties behind Antarctica that say that pretty much no country can kind of go and explore there. And there's a lot of other speculative stuff about what they've found up there. And if this is if they're being sucked, if the proto matter is being kind of brought in through the poles, well, maybe this could explain what's going on and why. Because there's something going on at the poles energetically that they don't really want us to know about, because there's something going on there. I mean, the fact that all countries are fighting all the time and they somehow can agree that no one can go to the poles, well, I think that there's got to be something going on.
Or they each have their little military safe space there where they don't scrap at the poles. Like, it's kind of a peaceful condition there. It actually ties into the Juno mission to Jupiter a bit. You've probably seen the picture where the North Pole of Jupiter is glowing. The thing is glowing just like the aurora borealis. So you got to think the same thing is happening on Earth. We're told that on Earth, it's solar radiation being deflected and sucked in through our magnetosphere. I don't know. It seems to me the same thing is happening on Earth as is happening on Jupiter. And actually, I was just watching a press conference just yesterday, and they made the point very clear that Jupiter is sending out microwave radiation and sending out heat. Jupiter is warm. It has its own heat. It's not just being heated by the sun. It has its own heat. So that implies, okay, so where is that heat coming from? Hey, I got to think pair production.
Right. So, if you take our growing Earth a step farther, and this is why we said growing Earth, not expanding Earth.
Right.
It seems that the process is it goes from a landlocked planet eventually, and then it expands outward. I say grow, but it does expand. It grows outward, and then it becomes a gaseous giant potentially, and then becomes potentially a star, and a star emits its own light. So Jupiter could be in this pretty far along. I mean, far along in the process of going from gaseous giant to a star, potentially.
Could be.
And so I was going to say too, one last point before we go to Yuga Cycles is, why have we never seen any pictures of the of the Earth from the top? We always get the image from the side.
We have some, and they do exist. They're just not good quality. For 2 weeks I was looking for good quality images of the poles, and they don't. As far as I can tell, they don't exist. Good quality. I'm talking about you can zoom in and just as if you went on to Google Earth now or Google Maps now, you could zoom in. You could probably see your apartment building. You might even be able to recognize cars. You get nothing even close to that when you start trying to explore the poles. And if these things are supposedly melting, they're going to kill us all. Shouldn't we have eyes on them? Shouldn't everybody be looking at the poles? And the whole public should be looking at the poles. They should be really important.
Right. If all this is going to be coming down to that, wouldn't they want us all to look at them? Be like, look, we need to do something. It just, once again, it's another thing that just doesn't add up.
Yeah.
And you can come up with your own implications as to why, but something's not right there. And so to me, this seems to point to that a little, or this seems to tie into that a little bit. But anyways.
Yeah. Yep.
So let's move on to Yuga Cycles.
All right.
First, what I wanted to do is talk a little bit about what Yuga Cycles are, and then I wanted to tie that into growing Earth. So first, maybe you can help describe what exactly a Yuga Cycle is.
Okay. Yuga Cycles, it's from the Hindu culture, which is a very old culture, very old religion, and it's the concept of cyclical time. Things happen, and years later they happen again, and they happen again, and they happen again. Okay, that basic idea. It appears to be The timing on this is a little difficult, but because when you get to looking about this, you find it's very obfuscated and there's not much agreement on what the timing is. But to run through the cycles, you have the Kali Yuga, which is the from lowest consciousness to highest consciousness.
You could say to lowest pair production, lowest energy to highest energy.
You could say that. Yeah, you could say that. You start out with the Kali Yuga, which is the lowest energy, the Dwapara Yuga, which is the next highest, the Treta Yuga, which is the next highest, and the Satya Yuga, which is the highest. And curiously, you have the same darn pattern in Greek mythology. They have the same idea, with the Iron Age is sort of the lowest consciousness. You have the Bronze Age, the Silver Age, and the Golden Age. And then it goes back down. So it goes back down from Golden Age, back down to Silver, to Bronze, to Iron, then back up to Bronze, Silver, Golden. And it just keeps going. You could either look at it like a sine wave, goes up and down and up and down, or you could look at it like a circle, like the snake eating its own tail. Just keeps going and going, and you keep getting back to the same point, back to the same point. You know, well, that's all well and good as a philosophy, but it doesn't satisfy my my left brain. I want to know, you can tell me that, but why? Why is this happening? So here's where it starts getting interesting, and we start getting some tie-in to Growing Earth. I ran across a video from Cliff High, and we'll put a link to this, where he's explaining. The title of the video is "Triune Humans and the Vortex of Time." I mean, it seems like kind of an out there video, but I was really on a Cliff High kick. I was enjoying some of the things he was doing with his Webbot, which is kind of like a digital Nostradamus. If you want to check out his work, go to halfpasthuman.com. He's also on YouTube. So I was checking out this video, and he's talking about how Yuga cycles relate to the precession of the equinoxes. I'm thinking, what are you talking about? And he's talking about the orbit of the sun equals the precession of the equinoxes, and it's 25,920 years, roughly 26,000 years. And I go, what? No, the sun takes a lot longer than that to orbit the galaxy. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about as the sun orbits the Milky Way galaxy, it spirals. It spirals as it's orbiting the center of the galaxy. And he references a great animation video by DJ Sadu, we'll link to that, which shows this spiraling of the sun over the whole solar system as it goes around the galaxy. So you can see as it spirals, when it's on the outside of the galaxy, it's in an area of lower energy. When it's on the inside of that spiral, it's in an area of higher energy and magnetism. And bingo, there's your tie to the Yuga cycles. The Yuga cycles are roughly 24,000, 26,000 years, depending on who you believe. And the precession of the equinox is roughly 26,000 years. It doesn't take an astrophysicist to put two and two together. That spiraling is the mechanism of the Yuga cycles as it moves in areas of less dense prana in magnetism to more dense prana ether magnetism.
Right. And,
so
just
that
to,
right
just
there
to, just to interject for 1 sec, I think important to, because honestly, I think there's a lot of people who don't even know what the precession of the equinox is.
Oh yeah, okay.
And I think, from my interpretation, you can correct me if I'm wrong. So if you were to say pick out one exact point, basically if you put a telescope maybe or a laser in the one spot, you didn't move it at all, and then you waited a whole year, for example, and see if that laser is in the exact, say it's pointing to the exact, say you're pointing to one star,
yeah,
and it's in one spot, over 26,000, you would see the skyline start to shift. Like that laser wouldn't be in the exact same spot it was before. It seems to shift. And so the great year, they call it, which is like the Yuga cycle, is the time it takes for the whole skyline to process around completely,
Right.
from what I understand. So it shifts. It's over 26,000 years. It processes in one full circle around, and we're told that that's because the Earth tilts on its axis, even though we're never ever told why.
Right.
And that Newton was the first one to come across it, and while Newton has come across many great things, no one really kind of and Newton's, so he's like a god in physics almost. No one kind of questioned it, but might not be what's happening. This might be an actual more real life theory on how that's happening, but
Yeah.
that would be how I would explain the precession in a simple way, that the skyline every year it's going to shift just a little bit more, and over 26,000 years you'll see a complete shift. And the ancients, civilizations knew about this, which is, I find, super fascinating, that we think they're so primitive, yet they can map a 26,000 year cycle or whatever, however many years you believe it to be. But that's pretty incredible, if you ask me. And it seems now, what we're presenting here, now we're trying to get into the science of exactly why. And I just, one last thing I wanted to say before you continue. So when you're thinking about this spiral, and I really encourage people to go check out the DJ Sadu video. I'm going to link it. You should be able to see it right now in the video when I finish editing it. But think of it like, for example, if it's a circular orbit or oval, or however you want to think about the orbit around the center of the galaxy, it's spiral. That circle is just a spiral circle, kind of like a spring that's wrapped around itself into a circle. I think that might be the best way to describe it. And as that spiral gets closer to the center, you get more higher consciousness. As it goes farther away from the center, you go into lower consciousness, which would be like the Kali Yuga or the Iron Age. And then you get closer, you're in what they often refer to as the Golden Age. And these terms that we've all heard of, everyone's heard of these terms, but no one, I think, probably ever thought anything of them or what they actually mean. I didn't until I started looking into it.
No, you hear, golden age. It was a golden age. It was a bronze age. You just kind of shove it aside. Hey, for that matter, I would hear about the precession of the equinoxes. Who cares? It's stars in the sky. I didn't see any connection between that and, my own consciousness, my spirituality, let alone the growing of the earth. I mean, we live here. This is a really important detail for us to know. And our ancient ancestors, they knew it was a really important detail. They built monuments for tracking the precession of the equinoxes very accurately. And another profound implication of this whole cyclical nature of time, if we're going into areas of higher consciousness, lower consciousness, is it kind of puts the lie to our modern convention that
time is linear.
Well, it's not that our progress is linear. That technology today is definitely more advanced than it was, say, 20,000 years ago. I can't believe that anymore. I think it ebbs and flows. I think it goes to high technology and comes crashing down. But we'll get into that. That's a good stuff. But yeah, the sort of mainstream explanation of the wobble of the Earth's axis, which supposedly is what causes the precession of the equinoxes, is, the moon's causing it. Which,
although it's like the moon and sun pull, right?
Yeah, intuitively, it doesn't make sense to me that a moon booking around the Earth every 30 days is responsible for a 26,000 year cycle. You found a great article that goes into the math about it. It comes down to the conservation of angular momentum. It doesn't add up until you consider the spiral. And you had another good point that's brought up in that article.
Yeah, I'll read that here. I'm going to read it actually
Okay.
word for word here, because it's a really great point. And I'm going to link this article as well up. It'll be called 6 Reasons to Consider the Sun as a Binary Star System, which we'll get into in a moment. But let's see. It says, first of all, if the actual top-like motion were occurring, as in the tilt of the axis, then we'd expect to lose a small amount of time each day. We would start to notice a small shift in our calculations for eclipses, planetary transits, and such, which have to be measured fairly accurately. The motion of the planets that we observe in the sky should also process along the rest of the stars and galaxies in the background, but according to Karl Heinz and U. Hohmann in their Venus transit studies, they don't. According to Krudian, we don't take into account precessional movement when calculating the positions of the planets or anything within our solar system for that matter. So any planets or other objects within the solar system do not appear to precess with respect to the Earth. The only objects that follow precessional movements are those outside the solar system. In this case, then precession cannot be due to the top-like motion that the lunisolar theory dictates. And so basically, this is saying how it's really like the things outside of our solar system, the stars and other things that process, but it doesn't seem to be that the planets process. Like they follow the same motions all the time. They're not in a 26,000 year cycle processionally as the stars and galaxies outside of here. So that is a super interesting point.
Yeah. And to close that off, if the Earth was just sitting here wobbling, everything in the sky should be precession, and it's not. So I can't believe I didn't see this before, because it's a really obvious point. It has to be that the whole solar system is spiraling. So
yeah, definitely check this article if you really want some nuts and bolts and science behind this. Like there's 6 really good points, and there's also books linked into this.
Right.
Definitely check out that link. It's going to be in the show notes, because it really takes it even much farther, and it's really for your, was it the left brain? That's the one that's really mathematical. It's very much more mathematical and scientific piece. So definitely check that out. But anyways, so going into the Yuga Cycles more, maybe now you can ready to take it to the next step on why it's spiraling.
Yeah. So what is causing that spiral? That's a big question. We got to go looking for it. Well, just let's take a stab at it. What is the brightest star in the night sky? Well, the brightest star, that's Sirius. Okay. You can find it real easily by looking up finding Orion's belt, the 3 stars of Orion's belt, and it points directly at Sirius. It'll be the brightest star in the sky, next to the sun, of course. But it's a bright bluish-white star. It's in the constellation Canis Major, so it's called the Dog Star, which that's a very important point. Sirius is called the Dog Star. All right. So it's kind of interesting when you look up on, say, the NASA website, you don't find anything about our sun having a binary star. That would a binary star would explain that spiral. It's not just spiraling for no reason. There has to be another mass that it's spiraling with. You look up on NASA, nothing. You look up on Wikipedia, nothing. In fact, Tim, you actually did a Google search, something about the sun's binary star, and Google did one of these preemptive answers. What did it say?
Yeah, it says in bold letters, "Sun is not a binary star."
I love that. Well, okay. Mainstream science.
Better stop searching now.
I'm done. Well, thankfully, our ancient ancestors left us some other clues, like, for example, the Great Pyramids of Giza. Anybody that's looked at the three big pyramids there, the main pyramids, can see that they're in the same exact alignment as Orion's belt. That should catch your eye. Okay, if you're looking up in the sky for Sirius, you find it by Orion's belt, and you just draw a straight line. Okay, so if we're looking at the pyramids at Giza, you have those three pyramids. You look in a straight line where you would think some monument to represent Sirius would be, and well, unfortunately, somebody put Cairo there. So if there was a monument for Sirius, there's a city where it used to be. Too bad, so sad. Well, let's keep looking for more possible clues of references to Sirius. If Sirius is indeed the binary star of the sun, there should be. That's a really important fact that they would want to convey to us. So there should be more clues for that. Well, in the Great Pyramid, the Big Pyramid, we do have a bit of a clue. There are 4 so-called air shafts in the Great Pyramid. There's the King's Chamber and the Queen's Chamber in the Great Pyramid. In the south shaft of the Queen's Chamber of the Great Pyramid aligns directly with Sirius. Like it lines up perfectly with Sirius. So that's kind of an interesting point. That's a nice clue. Now I ran across this. This is super interesting. Think about the Sphinx. All right. Look at the head on that Sphinx. It's way too small. Way too small. It pretty obviously was carved out of a previous head. And we're always told that that previous head was a lion. The Sphinx was a lion, and they put a human head on it. And we just kind of accept that. Well, I ran across a book called The Sphinx Mystery by Robert and Olivia Temple. This is at sphinxmystery.com. And they give a different idea about this, and I think it's a very good one. That the Sphinx was not originally a lion. It was actually a jackal or a dog to represent Anubis, which Anubis is the Egyptian god tied to Sirius. So if they're right, and I think they are, we had Orion's belt and a big dog statue, a huge dog statue carved out of limestone, just basically shouting at us that, hey, future humans, future generations, Sirius is really important. You need to check out Sirius, the dog star. This is very important. They built it into their mythology. Anubis took souls, across the river. The river was the Milky Way, into the afterlife. So that would kind of represent Sirius dragging the sun around in its spiral into areas of lower energy and higher energy, the Milky Way. One other interesting point, Isis is also, the goddess Isis is also associated with Sirius. And you go searching for Isis nowadays, and mostly what you're going to find is something about a terrorist organization. And probably most people don't even want to search for ISIS because they're going to be afraid that Google search is going to be going to implicate them in some nastiness.
What I found really interesting about the symbology of Sirius is that, well, a few things. First, it's both the symbol for like life, like higher consciousness, and death.
Yeah,
like it is both.
Yeah.
And if you think about the Yuga cycles, the Sirius drags us, because of the spiral, drags us into lower consciousness, where it's a very disharmonic state.
Yeah.
And a lot of people propose we're getting close to exiting the Kali Yuga, which seems to align a lot with what we're doing, which would explain the awakening that we're going through in an actual scientific way as well. And so it drags us into the lower consciousness, which probably signals death, and then it drags us into the higher consciousness, which is ascending into a life and an ascension. And so it's funny how it symbolizes both. And this is where I think you have two different types of symbols for it. And I think one other thing that I found is that it is it seems to be, from what I've researched, one of the most important symbols in Freemasonry.
Absolutely.
It seems to be only at a very, very high degree do you learn about Sirius. It seems to be like, okay, if you're at a lower level, God is the sun. But if you go into a higher level, it seems to be like Sirius, like it is the bringer of both high consciousness and low consciousness. And so that, again, I find very interesting. I'm going to drop a few links on that. The people who go much further into it than what we have time for here.
Right.
But just, again, a lot of data points behind that. And this is coming, from people within those fields. So something to really look at as well. I just find the symbology lining up directly with the Yuga cycles very well there.
Yeah, absolutely. Supposedly the eyeball, the eye of providence on the dollar bill, the shining, shimmering light behind that eyeball, it's not the sun, that's Sirius, which years and years ago, it was a much brighter star in the sky, if ancient accounts are to be believed. And one really important point to recognize is Sirius is actually two stars. You have the bright star, it's its own binary system. So I guess we have a trinary system thing going on. But Sirius, you have Sirius A, which is the bright star you see in the sky. And then you have Sirius B, which is a super massive dwarf star that actually Sirius A is doing a fairly tight orbit. What I read is 49, 50 years around Sirius B. And then our sun is spiraling around the both of them. And so that mini spiral that they're doing together, that accounts for our local, our little ice ages, our variations that just go up and down every 20 years. That falls really neatly into that.
You can even think of it like, this is something I just came up with here, but like, it's like we're like a little, like the sun reached its own star level, but it's like what maybe was a planet before, and like the other little Sirius is like a little planet around it as well that orbits it,
like
and
Jupiter,
maybe Jupiter. Doesn't it have a bunch of moons itself?
Oh yeah.
And so it might become the sun for those little moons there. And so it's just this whole thing is a process around the whole universe.
It's a fractal reality. Everything is, it's an infinite expansion. They made this with your podcast in mind. And this pattern seems to repeat itself down to the atomic, subatomic level, all the way up to galaxies. It's fascinating. Reality just seems to be just a holographic fractal down to the tiniest observable particles, toroids, up to galaxies and universes. Galaxies are orbiting each other on that level. It just keeps on going. It almost seems like we're on the toenail of a big giant, and what we see as galaxies are actually just atoms to him,
Right. What I was going to say is, and this is something that, because you got to understand, like I said earlier, we're still piecing a lot of stuff together. And we might in our lifetime, we probably won't have all the answers still to it all. But it doesn't mean but I can tell you one thing, I'm going to be searching, I'm going to be continuing going down this all, is that what we propose, and we could be wrong here, is that it's not it might not necessarily be Sirius that is what is bringing this higher consciousness. It could be that the center of the galaxy, or what, the center of the galaxy, is what's bringing the higher consciousness. So Sirius is what spirals us closer, because it's a binary star. They do kind of like almost like an infinity type pattern. Not really an infinity, but like
a DNA helix.
Yeah, kind of like a DNA helix type. And there'll be pictures in the video to see these, but Sirius is what spirals us closer to the galaxy, and that's which potentially it could be, though, that Sirius brings us more. I don't know that answer yet. So just wanted to point that out too. That's still
like a dog on a leash, just leading us along, you know. Hey, let's go over this way. Let's go over this way. It may not be Sirius. You see some videos that say, hey, Sirius itself, the energy from Sirius is why things are changing, why we're expanding consciousness or contracting or whatever. And myself, I don't think that's why. I think it's because Sirius is dragging us closer or farther away to the center of the galaxy. Can I prove that? No, I can't prove that. It's just a hypothesis. But hey, that makes sense to me, and I can throw it out there.
Right. But yeah, that's unless you have any other points, those are kind of what we mean by the terms of the Yuga cycle, how it works, and just explaining Yuga cycles too. Basically it's our most harmonic periods, where we might have access to very astral projection, psychic abilities. All these things could be in the golden ages. Interstellar travel potentially. I mean, I know it's getting speculative for some people, but if we're in the Kali Yuga now, I mean, there's a lot of possibility.
Let's talk about Kali Yuga.
Okay, go ahead. And then I was going to try to tie in the growing Earth a little bit.
Okay, let's go ahead and tie in growing Earth. So as the solar system moves into less dense and more dense areas of energetic space, you're going to have the Earth growing at a lesser rate, growing at a greater rate. And we're also going to have the sun growing at a lesser rate and growing at a greater rate. Now, I want to get into the implications of this a bit later, but just understand this isn't just a human consciousness thing. This affects the Earth and the whole solar system, for that matter. And I find it very interesting that we're doing an exploratory mission to Jupiter right now. It's reminiscent of the movie 2010, where Jupiter lights off into a star of its own. It's a kind of a fascinating coincidence there. I'm believing less and less in coincidences these days. But to jump back to the Yuga cycles, I think we're coming out of the lowest consciousness age, which is the Kali Yuga, or the Iron Age. And there are some people that say no, we're deep into the Dwapara. We're actually about to leave the Dwapara and go into an even higher age, because they say that we have pretty advanced technology, everything's pretty peaceful, and I don't see how you can make that assertion unless you're just completely misled by the mainstream media.
But we got to think. I was going to point too about, for your point, is that we're almost out of the Kali Yuga, and the Kali Yuga is still about what 6,000 years old. So that means we've crossed. It's not like we're in the heart of the Kali Yuga. We're almost in potentially the Bronze Age, the second best age, you could say. Dwapara, same thing.
Dwapara, second worst age, actually. But we're coming out of the worst age. Let me read this to you. These are symptoms of the Kali Yuga according to Hindu prophecy. This is how you know you're in Kali Yuga. Thieves will become kings, and kings will be the thieves. Rulers will confiscate property and use it badly. They will cease to protect the people. Base men who have gained a certain amount of learning will be esteemed as sages. Base men without having the virtues necessary for its use will be esteemed as sages. There will be many displaced persons wandering from one country to another. Predatory animals will become more violent. Fetuses will be killed in the wombs of their mothers. We're just going down the list. This is pretty much describes modern society. People will prefer to choose. People will prefer to choose false ideas. No one will be able to trust anyone else. People will be envious. There will be many children born whose life expectancy is no more than 16 years. People suffering from hunger and fear will take refuge in underground shelters. Young girls will do trade in their virginity. The god of clouds will be inconsistent in the distribution of the rain. Shopkeepers will run dishonest businesses. There will be many beggars and unemployed people. Everyone will use hard and vulgar language. We're doing a good job at watching that here on the podcast. Men will devote themselves to earning money. The richest will hold power. The state leaders will no longer protect the people, but through taxes will appropriate all wealth. Water will be lacking. And this is the best one, the last one. Pre-cooked food will be readily available. we can almost check off everything on this list, and this is prophesied thousands of years ago. I mean, I don't. That's Kali Yuga. That's where we are. I'm sorry, we're not in a higher stage of consciousness now.
And the Hindus also say we're in the Kali Yuga. So it's not just us here coming up with this. A lot of people. There are some people who say we're in the Bronze or Dwapara, but
yeah.
Now I'm not saying consensus is right, because we know very well that is not a good way to get your information. But I'm just saying, so it seems to be a lot of people think we're starting to come out of the Kali Yuga. Some people say we might even be coming out very soon, as in our lifetime here.